Do you have a few minutes to talk about strongholds? Strongholds. There are those areas in our life where we feel like the devil just has a stronghold. But there are some promises in the Bible that assure us that what we cannot do, God can, and He will bring down those strongholds. Would you like to hang around for that? It'll take about 7 minutes. If you don't, I understand. Let us know how to pray for you. Just post your prayer needs. I came across this teaching on strongholds in a study of the life of King David. Some years ago, I wrote a book about King David. It's called Facing Your Giants, and we're about to begin an online Bible study based on that book. I'd love for you to be a part of it. Details and dates right there on the web page. David is such a fascinating study because he did face so many giants in his life, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. And one of these giants is called a stronghold, a stronghold. Now, in his case, it had to do with the city of Jerusalem. I'm going to read from 2 Samuel chapter 5. 2 Samuel chapter 5, beginning in verse 6. And I'm just reading, kind of hopping around through this paragraph, 6 through 9. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who spoke to David, saying, You shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will repel you. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. And David said on that day, Whoever climbs up by way of the water shaft and defeats the Jebusites, he shall be chief and captain. Then David dwelt in the stronghold called the city of David. Now let me give you a little context on this interesting little paragraph. You know, when you and I think about Jerusalem, we think of temples, we think of limestone buildings, we think of prophets. We think of Jesus teaching. We think of a New Testament church growing. We imagine a thriving hub of history capital. That's what we think of when we think of Jerusalem. Now, when David saw Jerusalem for the first time in 1000 BC, he saw something else entirely. He saw an already millennium-old, cheerless fortress squatting defiantly on a spine of a ridge of hills. A rugged outcropping elevated her, and tall walls protected her. And Jebusites, they dwelt within her. Now, the Philistines, they fought the Amalekites. The Amalekites fought the Hebrews. Nobody messed with the Jebusites. They were a coiled rattlesnake in the desert. Everybody left them alone. They were the motorcycle riders. They were the tough guys. They were the Hell's Angels. Nobody messed with them. Nobody, that is, except David. Now, he just inherited his kingdom. He's the just crowned king. The kingdom is divided, and he's trying to be a strong leader, and he wants strong headquarters. The present base of operations, Hebron, is too far south to enlist the loyalties of the northern tribes. If he moves north, he'll isolate the southern tribes. So he tries to think of a neutralized location, a centralized city, and he thinks of what we now call Jerusalem. Now again, the story's not very long, just a paragraph, but it's just long enough to tantalize us with this twofold appearance of the word stronghold. Verse 7, David took the stronghold. Verse 9, David dwelt in the stronghold. Now I know that word, stronghold. There have been times in my life I have felt like the devil just had a strong hold on me, like he had staked a claim on a certain, aspect or weakness or frailty in my character, and he built a rampart around it. You ain't touching this flaw. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you have a stronghold, an explosive temper, fragile self-image, huge appetite, distrust for authority, ancient prejudice, strongholds. These are those deeply rooted, discouraging challenges. That's what David faced. From atop the turrets, those Jebusites had ample time to point arrows and direct arrows toward any of David's men that tried to climb the wall. And they mocked David for even thinking about it. You'll never get in here, they said. Even the blind and lame can keep you out. That's in verse 6. So they just poured scorn down upon David. Maybe like Satan has been pouring scorn on you for many, many years. You'll never overcome your bad habits. You were born into a family of alcoholism. You're going to die in it. Think you can overcome your hang-ups? Think again. Maybe you've heard the mocking voices that David heard. If so, oh boy, then your story needs the word that David received. A lot of people are going to read past it, so let's don't. Let's take out a pen and underline this 12-letter masterpiece. Nevertheless, 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 David took the stronghold. Granted, the city was old. Granted, the walls were difficult. Granted, the voices were discouraging. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold. My friend, God has a nevertheless to write in your story. God is writing your story even today, and He's got a big, happy, welcome nevertheless to put in the middle of it. She was born in a family of alcoholics. Nevertheless, she led a sober life. He never went to college. Nevertheless, he found a great profession and mastered it. Never studied the Bible until retirement age. Nevertheless, he developed a deep and abiding faith. We all need a nevertheless or 2 or 10, and God has plenty to go around. Strongholds mean nothing to him. Remember what Paul wrote? We use God's mighty weapons, not merely worldly weapons, to knock down the devil's strongholds. You see, if you and I try to fight by ourselves, we just have toothpicks. But God comes with battering rams and cannons. And what God did for David, my friend, He's going to do for us. He's going to do for you. The question is, will we do what David did? You know, David turned a deaf ear to those old voices. He turned a deaf ear. They mocked him. They were up there strutting on the wall tops. He just ignored them. He dismissed them and went about his work. You do the same. You just dismiss those voices. Turn a deaf ear to those old voices. And as you do what David did. Open your eyes to some new choices. Maybe it's time for a new strategy. Everybody else saw walls, but David spotted a tunnel. Everybody else focused on the obvious, but David searched for the unusual, and since he did what no one expected, he achieved what no one imagined. Maybe it's time to get creative with your problem solving. I had a friend once who battled alcohol. I'll never forget. He tried a fresh tactic. He gave me and a few others permission to slug him in the nose if we ever saw him drinking. That was his strategy. The wall was too tall. He was ready to try a tunnel. Maybe it's time for a new strategy, friend. Just do what David did. Turn a deaf ear to the old voices. Open wide eyes to new choices. And I just think a nevertheless is waiting for you just around the corner.